When a small-town cop arrests an elderly black man on suspicion of trespassing, he has no idea he's just cuffed one of the highest-ranking military generals in the country. But by the time the truth comes out, it's already too late. What happens next exposes the ugly face of racial profiling and delivers the kind of justice you never see coming. It was a hot afternoon in Georgia, the kind where the sun made the asphalt shimmer and the heat clung to every breath like a weight. On the side of a quiet road just outside of town, Colonel Raymond Carter, a decorated black Army general dressed in civilian clothes, was driving his late-model silver SUV back home from visiting a veterans' charity event. He had just spent the morning speaking to high school students about discipline, leadership, and the value of service. Raymond looked every bit the dignified figure, tall, strong, calm. His short-cropped salt and pepper hair gave him a commanding presence. He was wearing a neatly ironed button-up shirt, khaki trousers, and a pair of aviator sunglasses that reflected the road ahead. As he cruised down the stretch of highway, he noticed the flashing lights in his rearview mirror. A patrol car was speeding up behind him. He frowned. He wasn't speeding. There had been no traffic violation. Still, he slowed down and pulled over, careful to keep both hands on the wheel. Old habits die hard, especially when you're a black man in America, no matter your rank. The patrol car screeched to a halt behind him. Dust flew up. A young white officer stepped out quickly, too quickly. His hand was already resting on the holster at his hip. The officer, name tag reading D. Mitchell, approached Raymond's window with suspicion in his eyes. He didn't greet him with a good afternoon. He didn't explain the stop. He didn't even ask politely for identification. Instead, Officer Mitchell barked, "License and registration." Now, Raymond, calm as ever, nodded. "Certainly, officer. May I ask what this stop is regarding?" Mitchell's face hardened. "I'll be the one asking questions. Just do what you're told." The moment hung heavy in the air. Raymond could feel the tension, not fear exactly, but the slow boil of frustration and disappointment. He had spent 30 years defending this country. He had risked his life for the freedoms this officer enjoyed. And yet, here he was being treated like a criminal simply for driving while black. He handed over his license and registration. Mitchell didn't even look at the name. He glanced quickly and then, suspiciously, asked, "Where'd you get this car?" Raymond blinked. "Excuse me?" I said, "Is this vehicle yours?" "It is. Registered under my name. Colonel Raymond Carter." Mitchell narrowed his eyes. "Colonel, huh? So you're in the military?" "I am. Active duty. United States Army." But Mitchell didn't believe him. His eyes scanned the car, as if he was looking for something to charge him with. Then, without warning, he asked Raymond to step out of the vehicle. "Officer," Raymond said, maintaining his composure, "is there a reason for this request?" "Step out of the vehicle," Mitchell said, his hand now firmly gripping his weapon. Raymond exhaled slowly and stepped out. He moved with calm precision, his every motion slow and deliberate. This was not the first time he had dealt with racism, but it never failed to sting. He stood tall next to the vehicle. Mitchell quickly patted him down, rough and aggressive, and without explanation slapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "You're being detained for suspicion of vehicle theft," he said. Raymond's jaw tightened. "I just told you who I am. You have my license. Call it in." Mitchell scoffed. "Sure. And I'm the president. You people will say anything when you're caught." "You people." Raymond caught those words and locked eyes with him. Behind his calm gaze was a fire, but still he said nothing. He wasn't going to escalate. He wasn't going to give this man the satisfaction. He had seen men like him before, young, insecure, power-drunk, and emboldened by the badge on their chest. The officer forced him into the back of the patrol car and called for backup. Minutes passed. Raymond sat silently in the back seat, his wrists sore from the tight cuffs. His military ID, which had been in the glove compartment, was now sitting ignored on the front seat. The backup officer arrived, an older black sergeant named Lewis Daniels. The moment Sergeant Daniels stepped out of his car and saw who was in the back of Mitchell's cruiser, his entire demeanor shifted. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Daniels said. "Mitchell, what the hell is going on here?" "Caught this guy driving a nice car, claimed he's a colonel or something. I don't buy it." Daniels frowned. "You didn't check his ID?" "I've got his license, but come on, it's obviously fake. Look at him." Daniels' eyes darkened. "You're talking about Colonel Raymond Carter, Medal of Honor recipient, for deployments. I've met him. That man has more integrity than both of us combined." Mitchell's face turned pale. "Wait, what?" Daniels stormed to the back of the cruiser and opened the door. "Colonel Carter, I'm so sorry, sir. I had no idea. Are you all right?" Raymond nodded slowly. "Physically? Yes, but I'm disappointed." Daniels turned back to Mitchell. "You're in serious trouble, rookie." Mitchell stammered. "I didn't know. He wasn't in uniform. He didn't look like a colonel." Raymond looked at him. "And what does a colonel look like?" The silence that followed was deafening. The morning sun shimmered against the windshield as Major General Elijah Maddox eased his black Range Rover onto the highway, en route to the Veterans Outreach Center, where he volunteered twice a month. Wearing a crisp gray polo shirt tucked into clean khakis, with his military ID clipped discreetly to his belt and dog tags tucked beneath his shirt, he looked every bit like the disciplined leader he was, even off duty. Traffic was light, the weather was clear, and his thoughts were focused on a speech he was preparing for an upcoming memorial. He barely noticed the police cruiser pull up behind him. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. His tags were current. Still, the flashing red and blue lights ignited behind him like sirens in his memory. He signaled, slowed down, and pulled onto the shoulder. He turned the ignition off, placed his hands on the steering wheel, and watched the officer approach in his side mirror. The officer, a young white man with a squared jaw and sunglasses that reflected the sky, walked toward the driver's side window with his right hand hovering just above his holster. Elijah took a deep breath, lowering the window only halfway. "Good morning, officer," Elijah said calmly. "You know why I pulled you over?" the officer asked, voice clipped and suspicious. "I'm afraid I don't," Elijah replied. The officer leaned slightly forward, peering inside the luxury SUV. "This your vehicle?" "Yes, registered in my name." "License and registration." Elijah moved slowly, announcing each action as he reached into the glove box and pulled out the documents. Then he carefully retrieved his wallet from his pocket. "Here's my driver's license," he said, handing it over. "And here's my military ID as well." The officer glanced at the license, barely looked at the military ID, and returned his focus to Elijah's face. "Military, huh? Where'd you get this?" "I earned it. United States Army. That ID is valid and current." But the cop didn't seem convinced. Instead, he gave a slight smirk, as if Elijah had told him he was Santa Claus. "You mind stepping out of the vehicle? Am I being detained?" Elijah asked, not combative, just clear. "You're being investigated for suspicious activity." "What suspicious activity?" "I'm driving within the law." "Sir, step out of the vehicle, now." Elijah stared at him for a beat, then calmly opened the door and stepped out. The moment his feet hit the pavement, the officer grabbed his arm and pushed him toward the back of the car. "Is this necessary?" Elijah asked, voice low. "Put your hands on the vehicle." Elijah complied, maintaining his composure even as the officer patted him down. Another cruiser pulled up, and a second officer, also white, stepped out and approached with a hand on his taser. "You got backup for a traffic stop." Elijah muttered. "Don't move," barked the first officer. The second cop circled the vehicle, peering inside like Elijah was hiding contraband or weapons. When he saw the briefcase on the passenger seat, he motioned to the first officer. "We got something." "That's my personal case," Elijah said. "Contains documents. Confidential." But they weren't listening. The second officer popped the passenger door and pulled the case out like it was evidence in a crime. He opened it right there on the hood. Inside were several neatly stacked folders, a worn leather-bound notebook, and a silver medal in a velvet box. "What is this?" the second officer asked, holding up the medal. Elijah turned to look. "That's a Distinguished Service Medal, awarded to me after my 3rd deployment." The second officer scoffed. "Yeah? Who gave it to you? Your buddy at the pawn shop." That was enough. "I'm Major General Elijah Maddox," he said, slowly, his voice firm but still calm. "I have served this country for over 30 years. I commanded troops across 3 continents. That ID you dismissed, it's not a fake. And that medal you're treating like a toy, I earned it in combat." Both officers paused. The first one hesitated, glancing again at Elijah's ID, this time more closely. Something about the name must have triggered recognition. Or maybe it was the tone, the absolute authority in Elijah's voice. "Major General," the second officer echoed. "Yes, I am the Deputy Director of National Military Strategy. I answer directly to the Pentagon." Silence stretched. "I suggest you call your supervisor," Elijah added. The second officer stepped away, his radio crackling as he called for a lieutenant. The first officer, who only minutes earlier had manhandled Elijah, looked visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, You racially profiled me," Elijah interrupted. "There was no probable cause, no traffic violation, no warrant, no legal reason to pull me out of my car. You assumed I didn't belong in that vehicle. You assumed I didn't earn my ID. You assumed I couldn't be a general in the U.S. Army because of the color of my skin." The officer didn't respond. Minutes later, a supervisor arrived, an older black man in uniform with sergeant stripes. He approached Elijah first. "Sir, I apologize. I was briefed on the situation," he said, clearly uncomfortable with what he'd walked into. "Is everything all right?" "No, it is not." Elijah explained what happened, calmly but with precision, as if he were briefing a room full of officers. The supervisor turned on the officers immediately. "You searched his vehicle without consent," the sergeant barked. "Detained him without cause. You put your hands on a Major General of the United States Army." Both officers turned pale. They stammered, trying to explain their actions, but it was too late. "You're both going to file a report. I'll be reporting this up the chain," the sergeant growled. As Elijah gathered his documents and straightened his shirt, the younger officer tried to offer an apology. "Sir, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Elijah said flatly. "You meant every assumption you made. But let me be clear, your badge doesn't make you right. It makes you responsible." With that, Elijah got back into his SUV and drove off, leaving behind 2 shaken officers and a supervisor scribbling furiously in a notepad. He didn't blast music or hit the gas. He didn't call anyone to complain. Instead, he drove quietly toward the Veterans Center. He had promises to keep, speeches to write, and young soldiers to mentor. But his face was tight with thought. How many others had suffered the same humiliation, without the rank or recognition to protect them? It all could have ended quietly. The moment Officer Chad Mercer handcuffed that older black man outside the coffee shop, he had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought he had the upper hand, cocky, confident, untouchable in his uniform. The general's coat had slipped off during the scuffle, and with it, so had his cover. Inside that patrol car, General Elijah Matthews sat still, calm, composed. Not because he was weak, but because that's what discipline looks like. That's what leadership looks like. The kind you earn, not the kind you flash on a badge. But the storm was coming. Dispatch, this is Officer Mercer. Bringing in a suspect for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and failure to comply. Male late 50s. No ID. Claims to be military, Chad said with a snort. From the passenger seat, his rookie partner Jake glanced back through the rearview mirror. Sir, can I ask something? No, Chad said sharply. Don't go soft. I don't care how many sirs he throws around. He's probably one of those stolen valor types. Old men wanting attention. I see it all the time. Jake hesitated. But what if he's not? Chad didn't answer. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by someone newer than him, someone who hadn't yet learned how to read people. But maybe the rookie was seeing what he wasn't, the quiet authority in Elijah's posture, the way he sat with his hands folded like he was still in a strategy meeting at the Pentagon. They pulled into the precinct, unaware that this arrest was about to blow up far beyond what either of them could imagine. The unraveling. At the front desk, the clerk raised an eyebrow. No ID, she repeated. Nope, Mercer said, slapping the arrest paperwork on the counter. Won't give us his name either. Says it's classified. The clerk stared at Elijah, who stood tall and silent between the two officers. Sir, are you okay? She asked gently. I'll be fine once someone with authority gets here, Elijah replied, his voice calm but laced with meaning. Mercer scoffed. See? Delusional. Jake shifted uncomfortably. They put Elijah in holding. No phone call. No explanation. Hours passed, but not a single second ticked by without Elijah knowing exactly what to do. He wasn't just waiting. He was watching, listening, collecting. Because the truth has a way of turning in your favor when you stay calm enough to catch it. Then the call came. Not from Elijah, from someone else. A young black woman in a suit arrived at the precinct, confident, sharp, fierce. I'm Captain Leona Matthews, she said, flashing her federal ID, and I'm looking for my father. Chad looked up, confused. And who would your father be? Elijah Matthews, she said, Lieutenant General, retired, United States Marine Corps, 3-time Bronze Star recipient, National Security Advisor under 2 administrations. Ring any bells? Chad blinked. Wait, what? Leona stepped forward. You arrested a decorated war hero outside a coffee shop because of what? A suspicious look? A missing ID? She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her voice cut cleaner than any shout could. The fallout begins. Now, the captain of the precinct was called in. The desk clerk started whispering. Officer Jake's face turned ghost white. You said he didn't have ID, the captain said, looking straight at Mercer. He didn't, Mercer replied. He refused. Didn't give us a name. And that gave you reason to use force. Mercer crossed his arms. He was confrontational. You mean, he asked why he was being questioned. Leona asked, because I saw the footage, the surveillance from the cafe. My father never raised his voice, never threatened you, never resisted. She tapped her phone, and suddenly a screen behind the desk showed footage from the coffee shop's security camera. The moment played in painful silence. Elijah calmly sipping his coffee. Mercer approaching him. The tone, the escalation, the shove, the cuffs. No resistance, no aggression, just racial profiling caught in crystal clear resolution. Chad Mercer's mouth opened, then shut. He was cooked. Truth out in the open. Elijah was released within minutes. But the real damage had already been done. Not to him, But to those who thought their badge gave them the right to judge a man by the color of his skin instead of the content of his record, Mercer was put on administrative leave pending investigation. Internal Affairs had already begun digging into his past. And as for Jake, he requested to be transferred to community outreach. That night changed him. As Elijah walked out of the precinct, the same people who had treated him like a criminal now looked at him with a mix of awe and shame. But he didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Leona walked beside him, quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "You good, Dad?" Elijah smiled, faintly. "I've been through worse. But I'll tell you this." "What?" "I fought for a country that still doesn't always see me for who I am. But I didn't fight for their approval. I fought so we could change what that country sees." The ending that feels like a beginning. Later that week, the news ran the story. Racist cop arrests retired Marine general. Public outrage grows. Social media exploded. Veterans posted their own stories of being profiled in uniform. Black men and women across the country shared the video of Elijah's arrest, calling it another wake-up call. But this one had a twist, because in this story, the man they tried to dehumanize wasn't just a victim. He was a symbol, a leader, a man whose silence held more power than 1,000 shouts. And as for Mercer, the regret came too late. He learned who General Elijah Matthews was after it was already written in ink, because racism, when exposed to the truth, has nowhere to hide. The precinct was quiet, almost eerily so, as the sun sank low behind the city skyline, casting long shadows through the blinds of the interrogation room. Inside, Major General Elijah Brooks sat calmly, his hands still cuffed, a bruise blooming beneath one eye where the officer had slammed him against the cruiser. Yet his composure hadn't wavered, not once. There was a strength in his silence, a weight in his presence that made even the room feel smaller. Across from him, Officer Trent paced like a storm in boots. His arrogance had started to crack like a shell under too much pressure. The moment the general's wallet had been pulled from his belongings and that gold-plated military ID card fell onto the desk, the entire tone of the room shifted. It hadn't even been a whisper, just a look exchanged between Officer Morales and one of the detectives that made Trent's chest tighten with unease. And now, here they were. "You sure you're not faking that ID?" Trent snapped, still trying to recover control, his voice taut. Anyone could get a military badge online. Elijah turned his eyes toward him. Calm, measured. "Fake, I've bled for this country longer than you've been shaving. Son, I have nothing to prove to you." Just then, the door opened with a bang. A woman in a smart civilian suit walked in, trailed by two men in army dress blues. "I'm Major Karen Holt," she said without waiting for permission. She flashed credentials to the room like a blade. "Military Legal Division. You're detaining a decorated officer of the United States Army. And unless someone here wants to be standing in front of a federal judge tomorrow morning, I suggest you remove those cuffs." Now, silence fell. The officers glanced at one another, unsure who would be brave or foolish. Enough to act first. Trent stared, his lips parting slightly. "Wait, you're saying he's legit?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "He's not just legit. He's one of the highest-ranking officers in the Eastern Command. Served 3 tours. Bronze Star. Presidential Medal of Freedom." Another officer rushed forward, fumbling with the cuffs. They clinked open, falling from Elijah's wrists like the chains of ignorance being snapped. Elijah stood slowly massaging his wrists, but there was no satisfaction in his eyes, only tired disappointment. "You see me now?" he asked, staring directly into Trent's eyes. "Or do I need to wear my medals on my chest just to walk into a gas station without being treated like a criminal?" The room was still. Major Holt stepped beside Elijah. "We'll be filing a formal complaint. civil liberties violation, excessive force. And if I were you, I'd contact a lawyer. Trent's face was pale now, no longer filled with fire but with fear. His voice was quieter. We didn't know. You didn't want to know? Elijah said. You saw what you wanted. A black man in a hoodie at a gas station. You thought you were hunting a threat when you were attacking a protector. He turned to Morales, who had stood silently throughout. Her gaze met his, filled with remorse. I'm sorry, sir, she said quietly. I should have spoken up. Then start now, he said gently. Next time, don't stay silent. Outside, the air was cooler, the sun now just aglow beneath the horizon. Elijah walked with Major Holt beside him, a quiet dignity in each step. Thank you for coming, he said. She nodded. When I got the call, I knew something was wrong. You shouldn't have had to go through this. Elijah's jaw tightened. It's not just about me. This happens every day to people without my rank, without my badge, without backup. What happens to the ones who don't have anyone coming for them? She paused. Then we'll make sure this story doesn't go silent. Back in the precinct, the fallout had begun. A senior officer ordered Trent into an office. The door slammed. Morales stood by her locker, still shaken. She looked around at the other officers, many of whom were avoiding eye contact. It was uncomfortable, facing what they'd become used to ignoring. That night, Morales filed a report detailing what had happened, including her own complicity in not intervening. It was the first time she'd ever broken ranks. But in her heart, it felt right. And maybe that was the first step toward fixing what was broken. Meanwhile, social media had already caught wind of the incident. A bystander's cell phone video showed Elijah being slammed into the car. The comments were explosive. He's a decorated war hero. And this is how they treat him. How many times do we have to say, stop racially profiling black men before they listen? Salute to Major General Elijah Brooks. You are a true patriot. The video went viral within hours. News stations picked it up. Headlines screamed, Army General wrongfully detained in racial profiling incident. Police under fire after arresting black military hero. Elijah watched it unfold, quiet in his home, sipping tea with his wife beside him. Her hand was on his. She cried when he came home that night, angry, scared, relieved. Why didn't you tell them who you were? She'd asked. He had looked at her, eyes heavy. Because I shouldn't have to. The next morning, the mayor held a press conference, calling the incident deeply troubling and promising a full investigation. Civil rights leaders demanded reforms. The chief of police announced disciplinary hearings. But Elijah wasn't celebrating. He agreed to do one interview, just one. The reporter asked, "What would you say to the officers who did this to you?" He looked straight into the camera. I'd say, see us. Not just our skin, not just your fear. See our humanity. I fought for this country so we could all walk freely. All I wanted was a bag of chips and a bottle of water. Instead, I got bruises and cuffs. He paused, voice steady. I am a soldier, a father, a husband, a black man, and I deserve to be treated with dignity. We all do. The precinct was never quieter, not because no one was talking, but because everyone was listening. Every officer in the room stood in stunned silence as General Marcus Ellison stood tall, proud, and firm in the lobby, flanked by a lieutenant colonel and 2 uniformed military police officers from Fort Bragg. The golden insignia on his shoulders gleamed like the sun itself, and even those who had never worn a uniform knew what that meant. This wasn't just some guy in fatigues. This was a leader of warriors. The look on Officer Danvers' face was priceless. His cocky, smug demeanor from earlier had melted into a mix of panic, confusion, and regret. He opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. Finally, It was Captain Reynolds who broke the silence. "General Ellison," she said, straightening her posture immediately, "we deeply regret the events that took place earlier today. This was not how we—" "I'm not here for your regrets, Captain," Marcus said, calm but with unshakable authority. "I'm here to talk about accountability." You could hear a pin drop. The officers behind the front desk lowered their heads. The detectives who had watched the footage from earlier now pretended to be busy with paperwork. The weight of their complicity hung in the air, like smoke in a burning building. Marcus stepped forward, slowly, carefully, like a general surveying a battlefield. He turned slightly, gesturing to the officer who had originally brought him in. This officer not only harassed me, a law-abiding citizen, but racially profiled me, ignored my constitutional rights, and escalated a situation that should never have occurred. Danvers' eyes darted from face to face, looking for backup, looking for some excuse. "I didn't know who you were, man. You weren't dressed like someone important." Marcus turned to him. "And that's exactly the problem. You only respect people if they look important to you. But I'm not asking you to respect a uniform. I'm demanding you respect people, human beings, regardless of skin color, clothes, or status." The room remained silent. Captain Reynolds cleared her throat. "We'll be launching a full internal investigation. Officer Danvers has been placed on immediate suspension." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Suspension? After unlawful arrest, verbal abuse, and discrimination? You think that's sufficient?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "General, I understand your frustration, but there's a process." "No," he interrupted, his voice low but forceful. "You don't understand. You've been allowed to operate in a system that excuses this behavior. But I didn't come alone." He turned, and a tall woman in a navy blue suit stepped forward. "This is Special Counsel Rachel Morgan, representing the Department of Defense." "Captain," Rachel said, removing a document from her briefcase, "this is a formal federal complaint against your precinct under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. The DoD is launching an inquiry into systemic profiling by local law enforcement, beginning with this station." Reynolds' face drained of color. Danvers stumbled back. "Wait, what the hell is this?" Rachel stared him down. "It's called consequences, officer." 3 weeks later, the headlines were everywhere. Army general wrongfully arrested. Cop faces federal charges. Small-town racism exposed after military intervention. Hero general becomes face of justice reform. Marcus had kept quiet for the most part. He gave one public interview, standing with a group of veterans outside a courthouse, where he calmly stated, "This isn't about me. This is about the thousands of people who don't wear a uniform and still face this every single day." His message was clear. If it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. Danvers was officially terminated, stripped of his badge, and facing civil rights violation charges. His smirks were gone, replaced by court dates and legal bills. His silence in the courtroom was deafening. And for Marcus, he didn't revel in revenge. He didn't celebrate someone else's downfall. But he knew that his silence would have meant another black man would be mistreated tomorrow. He had a duty, not just as a soldier, but as a black man in America. And he answered that call with dignity. At the community hall, Marcus stood before a crowd of young men and women, mostly black, mostly from lower-income neighborhoods. They listened to him like their lives depended on it, because for many of them, it did. When that officer saw me, he didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a leader. He saw a threat, Marcus said, holding the microphone in one hand and gesturing with the other. "But I need you all to understand something. Who you are is not defined by their fear." Applause. "We live in a system that will try to shrink you, to make you believe you are lesser, that your dignity can be dismissed, or your life devalued. But let me tell you something. Your existence is not up for debate. Louder applause now. Cheers. And when they see you rise, when they see you in suits, uniforms, or scrubs, they may not respect it right away. But you don't live for their respect. You live for your truth, your ancestors, your purpose. Thunderous applause now. The crowd stood up. A mother in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. A teenage boy with dreads and a notebook full of goals shouted, "Thank you, General." Marcus simply nodded. His mission, as always, was never about glory. It was about service. Closing reflection. As the sun set that evening, Marcus sat alone on a park bench, watching the wind rustle through the trees. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his daughter. "Proud of you, Dad. You're not just my hero. You're everyone's." He smiled softly. Justice was never about big speeches or courtroom drama. It was about one thing, doing what's right, even when no one's watching. And that day, he didn't just defend himself. He defended everyone who never got the chance to.